Thank you for joining us for five-alarm fire species identification and control. Couple of housekeeping issues really quickly. If you're having audio problems, make sure your Zoom audio is connected properly. You'll see your audio settings in the lower left-hand corner. You can open the menu by clicking the arrow. Make sure you got the correct speaker device selected. Worst case scenario, you can leave the meeting and come back. And we find it helps if you select open in browser from your Zoom screen. We do have closed captioning enabled and you can turn it on at the bottom of your screen. Some Zoom tips that will help us out during the meeting. We do have panelists here to help with questions, but if you're just sharing information like a link or where you're from, or maybe a comment, please use the chat box, which is on the left side of the menu. And if you have a question for one of the panelists, please use the Q&A function. If you put your questions in the chat box, we may not see them, and we'd like to get to all of your questions. So again, general information, sharing information, comments go in the chat thread, questions go in the Q&A box. That'll really help us out. Very quickly, I want to share some upcoming events. In June, we have several invasive plant ID walks, and we also have Conservation Stewards Works Days. These are volunteer work days. The walks and the work days are coming to you from 12 counties across Virginia. They're led by our invasive management specialists, Natalie Walker and Jacob Adele. They are open to everyone, but we do require registration because numbers are limited to manage safety for everyone. So if you want to find more information about that, we'll give you the barcode in just a moment. We also have in June our quarterly summer ID and control webinar. So that'll be Tuesday, June 16th, Wednesday, June 17th. These are free online webinars where we're going to talk about the plants that you can see and control this season of the year. Those would be 1 hour each. And also at the end of the month, we have our next brown bag webinar coming up where we're going to talk about the 4 new invasive plant laws and a couple from last year and the year prior, and tell you where everything is at and what's happening next and how you can get involved to help advance things down the road. So that'll be Wednesday, June 24th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. I'm also very excited to announce that we are in communication with Ethan Tapper, who is an amazing forester up in New England, and he has 2 books out, including a new one, How to Love a Forest and the Forest Year. And we're hoping to have him join us for our quarterly meeting in July. We're just working on securing the date and time, but we're very, very excited to have Ethan Tapper. If you're interested in any of our events, you can find them at blueridgeprison.org/events, and there's the QR code to make it easy for you to sign up. So if this is your first time joining us, who is Blue Ridge PRISM? PRISM stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. We are the statewide leader for training and education about invasive plants in Virginia. There are PRISMs all around the country. We were the first PRISM here in Virginia. And our core purpose is to improve the health of our natural world for future generations. So today we want to talk about what we call 5-alarm fire species. And this is a term that we coined because of something we were seeing out on the landscape in all of our work. If you remember nothing else from this webinar, what I would like you to take away is the idea that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What you're looking at in this photograph is one tiny little Oriental bittersweet seedling, and that has the potential to become this. This photo was taken last year in Penn Park in Charlottesville. And what we're seeing is explosive spread of some very specific species, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So what are 5-alarm fire species? And again, this is a term that we coined. Many of you are familiar with the Department of Conservation and Recreation publishes the Virginia invasive plant species list. These are 103 species that have gone through a scientific protocol and assessment for ecological damage. And these are currently the ones that are listed, more under evaluation. But what we find is that not all of these are equal. And specifically, we've identified 6 different species, some of which have been here for a while and suddenly exploded, some of which are very new arrivals and are exploding at lightning speed across the landscape. And we're going to focus on these 6 species today. So for us, what makes it a 5 alarm fire species is that we are seeing this explosive spread across the landscape. And just one example of this is wavy leaf grass, which is a relatively new arrival. And it was on the early detection rapid response list. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But it has spread so quickly that sadly, it is no longer an early detection rapid response species. However, we're still calling it a 5 alarm fire species because of the pace at which it is spreading and the urgency that we all need to be on the lookout for this. In 2016, now the plant did arrive earlier than that in Maryland, but in 2016, there were 3 recorded observances on iNaturalist. And we use iNaturalist as a proxy for citizen sightings because scientists can't get out everywhere. And these were both in Shenandoah National Park. By 2026, you can see the massive spread that we're seeing, predominantly along Shenandoah National Park, also in Fairfax County, but we're also seeing these isolated satellite locations. And across the country, so the epicenter was originally Maryland, right in the Potomac watershed in 2016. This is what it looked like. And in 2026, you can see it has spread up into Pennsylvania and New Jersey and confirmed sightings all the way down into the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Wavy leaf grass has incredibly sticky seeds. We're going to look at a picture of those shortly. And we're noticing where these are being picked up by hikers along the Appalachian Trail, and that's one of the transport mechanisms. But every bird and every animal that passes through here with fur, these seeds cling to their fur and get very easily transported. The other thing that concerns us is not just the explosive spread, but these 6 species have the potential to completely change the ecology of the area in a very short period of time. So an example of that is a species like lesser celandine that starts off looking very innocently enough like this seedling young clump right here. Soon, it begins to spread through a combination of seed and underground bulbils, which are teeny, teeny, tiny little bulbs attached to the root systems that spread through disturbance and also through waterways. You begin to see a patchwork that starts to knit together. And within a short period of time, what you're looking at is a complete carpet. This is from the Gettysburg area, a complete carpet of lesser celandine where you have a monoculture on the forest floor. And while at first glance, this might look like a really pretty carpet of yellow spring flowers, what I want you to notice is what's missing from here. Notice that there is absolutely no forest understory. There's no shrub layer. There are no grasses. There are no spring ephemeral wildflowers. Everything that our flora and fauna need that they have co-evolved with is missing from this landscape. Now, lesser celandine behaves like a spring ephemeral, and it comes up when the tree canopy has not yet leafed out. It forms this dense mat that blocks the sunlight from warming the soil. That sunlight is needed for our tree seeds and our wildflower seeds and our shrub layer seeds to germinate. So by the time the tree leaves have leafed out and the lesser celandine begins to die back and disappear until the following year, it has done its damage and there's no regeneration happening. This is also having a dramatic effect on our pollinators, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So which 6 species are we calling 5-alarm fire species, and where are they found? So these are species that when we go do site visits on people's properties, we elevate these to the top of the priority list along with other early detection species. So 3 of these 6 species are found in riparian and moist areas. So the first is Japanese knotweed, the second is incised fumewort, and the third is lesser celandine, which we were just talking about. So if you have wet, moist ditches running alongside or through your property, if you have a creek bank, if you butt up against a river, if you have a small stream, even if it's an ephemeral stream, you want to be on the lookout for these 3 species. 2 of them are found in woodlands and on edges. So Oriental bittersweet is a climbing vine, and wavy leaf grass, which we mentioned earlier, is a very low growing trailing grass. You find these in shaded areas and along forest edges. Particularly Oriental bittersweet likes disturbance, but you're not going to be looking for these 2 necessarily out in an open meadow. And the last is two-horned trappa, which is a relatively new arrival. And this is an aquatic species. So this will be floating on the visible parts will be floating on top of ponds and lakes, and then it roots down into the mud. So if you have a pond on your property or a lake or very slow moving water, or you have a neighbor, you want to be educating the folks in your community about this plant, and you want to be on the lookout for this. So 2 of these are also still on what we call the early detection and rapid response, or EDRR lists. And you'll notice that those are indicated as EDRR species on the Virginia DCR list of 103 species. So what is early detection and rapid response? It's when we have the cheapest and easiest way to manage invasive species is when they are first introduced to an area. So the new arrivals. So vigilance and curiosity are your friends. Get curious about things that you see that you haven't noticed before. Learn how to identify them. What's that plant? I don't remember seeing that before. Could this be a new arrival? So the classic chart of what we call the invasion curve looks like this. In the lower left-hand corner at time 0 is when a plant is first introduced to an area. And at that point, it takes a while before somebody notices it. So then you have detection in the area inside the red circle. At the time it is first detected, you have the ability to prevent the spread. And as time progresses and the plant begins to spread, within that red circle, we still have what is possible to eradicate that species. Unfortunately, public awareness usually begins when the horse is already out of the barn. And at that point, the spread is so great that we no longer use the term eradication, and we start talking about controlling and managing these species. So early detection and rapid response is absolutely critical. And we are in the process of developing a pilot program for trained, certified conservation rangers who can help us go out and find 52 new species, newly arrived species in Virginia that we want to monitor and go in and eradicate from public lands. These species are so newly arrived, they haven't even had a chance to be assessed yet, but this is the time to get them. So I want to spend some time talking about the ecological damage. Why are these 6 species so devastating to our environment? As you may be well aware, invasive plants have many impacts, visible and invisible. So one of the key impacts is that they deprive pollinators of essential nectar sources. They also harbor disease-carrying pests like the black-legged ticks that carry Lyme disease and the mosquitoes that harbor West Nile virus. They smother the trees and block plants from sunlight. They destroy habitat, cause wildlife extinctions. They disrupt tourism and recreation. They warm the waterways. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Increase the cost of public forest management. Several of them are poisonous to our livestock and devastating to our farmers across the Commonwealth. They damage agricultural fields and pastures and equipment like the thorns on calorie pear. They reduce resistance to fire, drought, and floods. At least two species, kudzu and Japanese knotweed, are known to release carbon from the soil, not store carbon as other plants do. So they're adding to the CO2 in the atmosphere, increasing the level of greenhouse gases, and they disrupt bird nesting and migration. But we're going to talk about the specific impacts of these 6 species. So this photo here is of a classic high quality trout stream for our beloved brook trout here in Virginia, which is part of our tourism economy. And this is up tucked away in Shenandoah National Park. If you've had the pleasure of hiking in these areas, you may have come across a stream that looks like this. And so this is relatively uninvaded. This is a classic eastern temperate forest, and you can see that the stream itself is deeply shaded by the forest canopy. This helps to keep the water cool. And the brook trout require cool waters for their spawning grounds as they migrate upstream in the fall. They have to make it to these nice, cool pools. What happens when Japanese knotweed moves in is this. So the knotweed crowds out all other vegetation along the stream side, and it opens up the forest edges to being overwhelmed by vines in this particular picture. And this is from Fairfax County. These are porcelainberry vines. As you move closer to Shenandoah National Park, we see kudzu and oriental bittersweet having the same impact. To give you a sense of scale, this is what we're talking about when you're down along the water's edge. And here's another photo to give you a sense of the height and the density. Nothing else can grow amidst these dense monocultures of Japanese knotweed. This is what the plant looks like when it's blooming in late August and early September. So what happens is this negative feedback loop. Now, this diagram comes from research that was done in the Midwest, but if you swap out the species, it applies to our streams as well. So on the left, you see a diagram showing a healthy stream with diverse deciduous trees and the trout that migrate upward. And what happens is these trees drop their leaves into the stream, and it creates what we call a watershed T. And that specific combination of tree leaves feeds a very complex macroinvertebrate biology going on, or ecology, below the surface of the water, which in turn feeds the insects that the fish feed on, and then the flying insects feed our birds. And so you have this very complex web of life happening. When invaders come in and the trees begin to die off, then you have invasive trees come in, invasive shrub layers come in, and that leaf combination changes. And so the watershed T changes its composition, and it loses the ability to support that macroinvertebrate ecology. And the water begins to warm and CO2 begins to be released. And so the insects begin to disappear. The same fish cannot be supported. And then the birds begin to disappear. And then as the shrub layer, the invasive shrub layer gets denser and denser, now the water is really warming up and CO2 is really evaporating from the watershed. And now none of the large fish can be supported. The birds completely disappear and there are virtually no insects. So this is what's happening in our watershed where Japanese knotweed is making its way up. Other riparian impacts. In the spring, many of you have had the pleasure of going on a Virginia bluebells walk or a spring ephemerals walk where you see the beautiful dozens of species of ephemerals that support our native pollinators. We have several hundred species of native bees here in Virginia, and what a number of people don't realize is that some 25 to 40% of those native bees are what we call specialist bees, meaning they can only feed on one specific species or genus of flowers. And if they come out of hibernation and they can't find that particular flower, then they die if they can't find the nectar they need. And then that flower that relies on them for pollination also disappears. So when a plant like incised fumwort invades these riparian areas, it crowds out all of the native plants that our pollinators need, and they begin to disappear. So this is an infestation of incised fumwort, which comes up in the spring. It has a very short life cycle, but it has seed pods. We're going to see a close-up picture that explode ballistically, and then those seeds are carried away by ants, and they're very sticky seeds. So an example of this is our beautiful spring ephemeral called Dutchman's breeches, which look like upside down pantaloons hung on a clothes wire. And that flower has developed a relationship with our queen bumblebees. It relies almost exclusively on pollination by the queen bumblebee because of the shape of the flower and the queen bumblebee's tongue. So when the incised fumwort begins to crowd this out, then we begin to have the collapse of our ecology in these areas. The same thing happens with these mats of lesser celandine. What you're seeing here is a complete blocking of the soil floor. You notice that there are very few young trees coming up. There's very little shrub layer coming up, and there are no spring ephemeral wildflowers coming up that our specialist bees need to be able to survive when they first come out of hibernation. Here in the Piedmont, this is what a classic mesic mixed hardwood forest looks like in Biscuit Run in Albemarle County. You can see in the early spring, there's a lot of openness. There's a mix of different types of trees, and there's a wonderful mix of sizes of trees. You have young trees, you have baby saplings, you have large older trees. So this forest is successfully regenerating itself. We have to keep in mind that all trees have a lifespan just like we do. But right across town, this is also in Albemarle. We saw this picture earlier. This is what happens when Oriental bittersweet is invading and taking over the trees. It drapes itself over the tree canopy like you dropped a wet beach towel and just smothered everything. Wildlife cannot move through this. Birds can't find places to nest. It can block waterways. This is not far from the Rivanna. And it deprives all of our flora and fauna of the food and the sunlight that they need. This is from Great Falls Park in Northern Virginia. This is a classic, healthy Piedmont acidic oak hickory forest. And if you look closely at this photo, you'll see large trees, baby trees, little seedling oaks. You'll see grasses, and you'll see wildflowers that are either just finishing blooming or about to bloom. You'll see a dense shrub layer underneath. This is what the healthy forest should look like in this part of Virginia. This is the native plant community called an acidic oak hickory forest, which is very common in the Piedmont. This photo was taken not far from there in the Patapsco, Maryland area. This is what happens when wavy leaf grass moves in. So I'm going to back up really quick. You can see the difference between the healthy forest and the forest invaded by wavy leaf grass. There's nothing else growing here on the forest floor except for this grass, which is unpalatable to all of our wildlife. And our bees can't use this for pollination. And so the wavy leaf grass comes up, it blocks the seeds from germinating. The forest will not regenerate. There's no shrub layer for browsing, and this begins the death of this forest. With aquatic species, this is a classic Virginia farm pond. This happens to be at Claude Park in Loudoun County. It's used for fishing and recreation. You can see a family of ducks that is enjoying this pond. And what's happening across Northern Virginia is the spread of two-horned trappa. Two-horned trappa has very sharp barbs. We're going to see a photo of that cling to the feathers of wildfowl. For example, Canada geese. They land in a pond. The barbed seed pods get stuck onto their feathers. They take off, they fly to another pond, they deposit those seed pods, and another infestation begins. Very quickly, this plant spreads and completely covers the surface of the pond or the lake or the slow-moving water. You can see that it's blocking all sunlight from the pond vegetation that is supposed to be growing underneath the surface. It also changes the oxygenation of the water column. It makes it difficult for wildlife to get through. It completely disrupts any type of recreation in these areas, and this will begin to kill off the ecology of this pond. So we really want everyone who lives near a pond or lake or slow moving water source to be hyper vigilant for this particular species. Let's go ahead and dive into the identification of these. So Japanese knotweed, when it dies back, when it first comes up in the spring, it's going to look like giant asparagus stalks. You're going to find it again in wet areas, riverbanks, streams, ditches. In the peak of the growing season, it will grow up to 6 inches a day, almost right before your eyes, and it will reach a peak of somewhere between 12 to 15 feet tall. Again, you saw photos of very dense thickets that crowd out every other species, and it spreads primarily through rhizomes and stem fragments. So if you mow this plant or string trim this plant, or cut this plant in any way, tiny fragments as small as a fingernail can regenerate a new patch someplace else. We don't recommend that you cut this plant in any way. Again, on the left, you'll see when the shoots first come up, they look like these odd asparagus, and then they quickly gain height. And by the time they're 2 to 3 feet tall, you're going to see very distinctive leaf. There's no leaf quite like this in the Virginia flora. It's shaped like a spade. So the base of the leaf is very flat, and then it's oval coming to a point at the tip. Once you see this leaf, you can't unsee it, and you'll recognize it everywhere you go. If you look at the stem towards the end of the stem, so the canes themselves will be jointed like bamboo, but the outer stems are going to have a zigzag pattern, and they're going to be a purplish maroonish color, and the canes may have purple splotches on them as well. So these are very distinguishing features that make it clear that you are looking at Japanese knotweed and not any other species. This plant was originally brought here as an ornamental, and it was almost a sleeper species. So we don't know why some of these species were here for a long time, and then suddenly they exploded. And right now, the epicenter of Japanese knotweed problem seems to be in New Jersey. It's tremendous problem up in Massachusetts. Townships are really struggling with this plant. We don't know why it lived ornamentally in gardens and then all of a sudden it just took off, but it did. There's some research going on to try to understand these spread patterns, but we don't have answers yet. So when you begin to see a dense infestation, you'll look at this. It can cover acres and acres and acres. Pony Island Park in Richmond is an area where the James River Park Authority and friends have been trying to deal with knotweed for many years. You may have heard that knotweed can grow through asphalt. Yes, it can. It can grow through bricks, taking advantage of little cracks in mortar and then pushing out the bricks. It can also take advantage of fault lines in concrete and push its way through concrete. It comes from Asia and it's known to grow through lava on the sides of volcanoes. You may also have heard that if you're in the United Kingdom, it can be very difficult to get a mortgage if you have this on your property. They do plant inspections for knotweed, and you can't sell the property or get the mortgage without a remediation plan in place. So this is a species that you want to be hyper vigilant about if you find it on your property. This is the current distribution of where citizen sightings of Japanese knotweed are occurring. Again, it largely follows the watershed, and then it'll work its way up ditches into neighborhoods from streams and rivers. Let's talk about incised fumewort. So this plant behaves like a spring ephemeral. It's going to start leafing out in February. Again, stream banks, river banks, well-drained floodplain forests. It's very low growing. It really tends to be around about 12 to 18 inches tall when it sends up its bloom spike. But first, you're just going to see these very low growing clumps of leaves that look a lot like flat leaf parsley. And you want to get in there before the plant blooms. It will go to seed very quickly. And as I mentioned, the seeds are ejected ballistically, and then they're picked up and spread by ants. They're also spread by waterway and disturbance. So you can see the leaves on the left that look very much like parsley peeking out from a log or leaf litter on the forest floor. The flowers are distinctive. They're tubular and bell-shaped. And very quickly, those flowers become these tiny little seed pods that when they're ripe, you touch the plant and you feel the seeds just spring out like somebody shot them out with a slingshot or some type of propeller. It will very quickly form a carpet across hillsides and forest floors and begin to crowd out all the rest of the species there. There is a native look-alike. The leaves are quite similar unless you study them closely side by side. And when in doubt, you can wait until the flowers bloom. They will bloom about the same time. And the native is yellow and the invasive is purple. So it's very easy to tell apart. We were treating and trialing some new herbicides on this species earlier this year. And when you're in a patch and you spend a lot of time side by side with both of them, it becomes much easier to recognize the difference between the leaves. To a novice eye, it can be confusing, and you can wait until the flowers bloom. Right now, this is the distribution of known citizen sightings in Virginia for this plant. But again, it's moving very quickly. So you want to be keeping an eye out. It is in shady areas. You're not likely to find that in an open meadow, for example, or in a very, very dry area. It likes some moisture and some shade. We talked a little bit about lesser celandine. This also behaves like a spring ephemeral where it appears in February and then in March. It very rapidly covers the forest floor and then it begins to bloom these bright yellow flowers. The leaves are small and heart-shaped and waxy. The plant stays very low, only 2 to 4 inches tall. And again, it has these little bulbils. We're going to take a look at the picture there. So you can see the heart-shaped, slightly wrinkled leaves. The flowers can have 8 to 10 petals on them, very bright yellow. And then when you pull up the roots, if you dig them up, you can't hand pull this. The little stems will break off right in your fingers. But if you dig it up with a little hori-hori knife or a larger shovel, you'll see these tiny little miniature bulbs that are one of the ways that this plant spreads. And again, when it begins to take over, this is a neighborhood not far from Rock Creek Park in Northern Virginia, and this entire ravine is now covered in lesser celandine. We do have a native plant that resembles lesser celandine. So on the left, you see the native marsh marigold. It has fewer petals. The leaves are a little bit larger, but what's most distinctive is that marsh marigold will appear in small isolated clumps or maybe a few small clumps together. You will never see a carpet of marsh marigold. So the moment you see that carpet of green, that should be your first indicator that you're looking at an invasive plant, invasive lesser celandine. You can also flip over the two flowers, and one has a sepal and the other does not. But again, you're going to be looking for large mats of flower, so it becomes pretty distinctive which one is which. This is the current map of citizen sightings of lesser celandine, again, really following our predominant waterways. But it's on the move, so you want to be on the lookout for it. So Oriental bittersweet, many people are familiar with. It likes disturbed habitats, particularly forest edges, and then it makes its way into the forest as it kills the tree canopy. It can climb up to 60 feet into the trees, and it constricts the trunks and stems like a boa constrictor, smothers the canopy. It's a prolific seeder in the autumn, and those seeds are spread by birds, and they end up absolutely everywhere. The leaves are distinctively round. When they first come up, they're round like a silver dollar, and the Latin name Celastris orbiculatus means round. When you see how distinctively round they are out on the landscape, there are no native plants that look like silver dollars like that. As the vine begins to grow, the shape of the leaf will change, and you'll see that it will start to some of them will start to taper to a point. The bark looks a lot like snakeskin, and it will twist around trees and strangle the trees like a boa constrictor. And here it's twining on itself. When you pull the plant, you will notice it has a bright orange fibrous root system. So those orange roots are a giveaway. When the seedlings are very small, you can hand pull them. And I encourage you to be on the lookout for these bright green, silver dollar shaped leaves and pull them out before they start to get deeper. They become much more difficult. For example, the one on the left, you would not be able to hand pull that. It would just break off in your hand. So when it starts to get that size, you're already going to need to dig it or use a different measure. But the little ones can be hand pulled. Right now, what you're likely to be seeing is a wall of green beginning to climb trees. I took this picture just a week or so ago. The teeny tiny little round balls that you see at the base of the leaf nodes, that's where it's going to bloom. It's a very inconspicuous flower, and then the berries will appear in the fall. But you can see how very round these leaves are as it begins to climb up into the canopy. So along forest edges, oftentimes you'll just see a wall of this climbing up into the trees. And again, this is what it's going to end up looking like, and the trees underneath will be dead or dying. Oriental bittersweet is very widespread, particularly along the Blue Ridge Mountains and in the forests of Northern Virginia and edges, and it's also made its way into the coastal plain and along Richmond and in the ridge and valleys. So this plant, again, has been here for a while. We don't know why in the last 3 to 4 years in particular, there just seems to be a tremendous explosion of this, where we're seeing seedlings occur in places that we haven't necessarily seen the same kind of spread before. So this is one that you really want to get on top of because of how devastating it is for the ecology and how fast it's spreading. I'm fighting these seedlings here on my property every single day. And I don't have any mature vines anywhere nearby. It's a few properties over from mine, but we've just had crop after crop of these little seedlings. Wavy leaf grass, again, a relatively new arrival. Um, you're going to find it in forests and woodlands. It is a low growing trailing grass. And what's most distinctive about this is the leaves are fully rippled from one end to the other, and the ripples go from side to side, and it reminds me of a Ruffles Have Ridges potato chip. Once you see these rippled leaves, you can't unsee them, and the stems have a very fine, sticky hair along them. So this trails along and it gets to about 12 inches tall. When it sends up its flower spike, you might see it reaching 18 to 24 inches, but predominantly you're looking for a very low growing grass. You often find it mixed in with Japanese stilt grass, which also spreads rapidly, but we're seeing this really take off like wildfire. It's going to create dense mats that shade out any kind of germination. And so on the left, you see the rippled leaf like a potato chip. The flower, it's going to send up a flower wand. This is magnified tremendously. The flowers are so tiny as to be almost inconspicuous. They're not providing any benefit to our pollinators. And on the right, you see after those tiny little flowers have died back, you get these very, very, very sticky seeds. They stick to everything. They will stick to your shirt, your pants, your clothes, your boots. They stick to your dog's fur, birds that land in here, bears that go through here, deer. Everything is transporting these seeds. They dislodge from the stem very easily and end up being moved miles. And so once the seeds appear, we highly recommend that you don't allow your pets to go anywhere near this area. Don't hike through wavy leaf. And if you are going to pull at that time, which we don't recommend that you're pulling after it goes to seed, it's just too easy to transport this. And as I mentioned, it was an EDRR species until very recently. So when you first see it, it's a low trailing grass like this. This is almost prone along the forest floor, and then it will lift itself up a little bit and send out those flower spikes. And then it becomes a dense patch like this, which begins the death of this forest ecology. This is the current distribution. Department of Forestry has been assisting prisms with money from the state to try to manage the spread. Blue Ridge Prism manages somewhere between 7, 8, 9 different sites that we've been treating for several years, trying to get ahead of this. But you really want to be on the lookout for this and pull every instance that you can find. These new satellite locations are very, very new, likely spread by somebody who was hiking and got in their car and went home, and there you have it. Two-horn trappa, again, these are a floating aquatic plant underneath the leaves. You'll see there are bladders. This leaf has an overall sort of a kite shape to it, where two edges are straight, two edges are deeply serrated. They form a floating rosette, again, shading out all of the vegetation, and then they root down into the mud. The leaf on the left, very distinctive. They're tiny, they're 1 to 3 inches across. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. The flower is also very, very tiny, pale pink. And then the name two-horn trappa, you can see the seed pod on the right. It reminds me of a longhorn cattle. And so that's the name, bispinosa, two spines. And so those barbs are what stick to the feathers of the waterfowl that land in these ponds and lakes. And then when they take off and fly, they move these to the next pond down the road. One thing that distinguishes this species, this is in the water chestnut family, and you can see these bladder-like membranes that like little oval balloons. That's what helps keep the plant floating. The undersides of these leaves are red. There are other related species which are also invasive, and the undersides are green. Again, you get these dense floating mats. This is taken from a wetland area up in the Northern Virginia Potomac watershed. You can see the two-horn trappa has completely covered this entire wetland area. This is just an ecological disaster. And this is a site where they've been trying to rake and pull the spinosa again up in Northern Virginia, where the concentration of it, and they were experimenting with trying to corral it while it dried out before they could dispose of it. So it appeared originally in one location right around the Potomac area, and it is rapidly spreading from pond to pond. Last year, it arrived in Orange County. And then when I pulled this map, I see that there's a confirmed sighting in Albemarle County. So potentially coming to a pond near you, you want to be on the lookout and you want to report any sightings of two-horned trappa. So very quickly, we're just going to talk about control methods. I put together a chart for you. I'm not going to go over this entire chart. You can refer to this in the recording. But the 5 methods available that we teach, hand pulling, digging, raking, cut stump treatment, or foliar spray for these specific 6 plants. You'll see that two-horned trappa using a rake and heavy gloves is one method. You can also do a foliar spray with Japanese knotweed, the only proven successful method after decades of research is to do a foliar spray. You do not want to pull it, dig it, try to rake it, or cut stump it. All you will do is lead to the spread. 3 of these plants you can hand pull: incised fumewort, oriental bittersweet, and wavy leaf grass. You can dig small isolated clumps of lesser celandine. You have to be very careful to dig wide and deep to get all of the bulbils. Otherwise, once you have a large mat, you're going to be limited to a foliar spray treatment. So we provide the months that you're going to want to be treating these. And the overall thing to keep in mind, with the exception of Japanese knotweed, is you always want to treat before the plants set seed. You want to stop the spread. And so you want to get in there, sometimes even with incised fumewort, ideally you get in there before the plant even flowers. But once these things flower, you definitely want to get in and remove them from the environment. Now, the difference is Japanese knotweed, where the research has shown that the most successful time to treat this plant is right after the plant blooms and the flower fades. And that's when that's to protect the pollinators. The pollinators go away, and now the energy is being sent down into these rhizomes that can go 9 feet down into the ground. That's why you can't dig this plant, and they can spread up to 60 feet in any direction. And so the foliar spray recommendation is beginning right after the flowers fade, and you need to finish it 2 weeks before the first hard frost, because the above ground parts of the plant will die in the fall, and then a treatment won't be effective, and then it'll come back up with those asparagus-shaped spears in the springtime. So again, you're waiting for flower fade, and then you're going to go in and do a foliar spray. That is the only proven successful method for that plant. So if you need to use an herbicide method, which herbicides do you want to use? So again, I put together a chart for you that you can refer to in the recording. If you have two-horned trappa and you have a large infestation that you cannot rake and it needs to be an aquatic spray, you want to call a professional. The other plants you can do yourself. These are the recommended chemical concentrates. That's the label percentage active ingredient in the first row at the top that you're going to be looking for. These are generic plants. These are non-registered, meaning any member of the public can buy these. You do not have to have a license or be a commercial applicator. Those are the only herbicides that we teach to the general public. And then each of these has a specific recommendation, and we've put the percentages in there. I just want to point out Japanese knotweed, 2 to 4%. AI stands for active ingredient. That's a different calculation than the other calculations. The other ones, the percentage we're giving you, 2%. V/V stands for volume per volume, and that means you're calculating your 2% off of the product right out of the jug. If you are new to herbicides, I highly recommend you watch our recording from last month where we go into great detail about how to mix, what these percentages mean, and how to use these. We're not going to cover that again in the interest of time here, but these are the recommended percentages and what you're going to use. And again, we always have to remind you that if you're going to use herbicides, the label is the law. You need to familiarize yourself with the information on the product label. If you need help learning how to read a pesticide label, you can use this QR code and it will show you what the different sections of the product label mean. And very quickly, always a reminder about safety if you're using herbicide products. This is the minimum personal protective equipment that is required by law on the label: long sleeves, long pants, closed-toed shoes and boots, socks, safety glasses, and nitrile gloves to protect your skin. We strongly recommend, in addition to that, double leather palm work gloves if you're working with species that are likely to tear your nitrile gloves. Bring an extra pair of nitrile gloves in your pocket in case you do have a tear. And we always recommend head or sun protection. Even if you're working in the forest, things fall out of the trees. Always a reminder about applicator hygiene: no food, drink, or cell phone use the moment the gloves go on and you start working with herbicides until the moment the gloves go off. Put your phone in your pocket. Don't do anything that could bring a gloved hand anywhere near your face. Herbicide methods, again, we have multiple webinars about this, but cut stump, just a quick review. You're going to use a buckthorn blaster to cut the stump, create a clean cut, and dab a tiny bit of surgically targeted herbicide right onto that stump. You'll need a buckthorn blaster and a pair of loppers, and you'll need triclopyr amine and blue marker dye. Pour it right out of the jug, no dilution required. Step 1, 2, 3, you're going to cut low, you're going to dab, and then you're going to cut high. And that's it. Very, very easy. This is what you're going to do with Oriental Bittersweet. Very quick, very effective. And a warning, we always remind people, do not pull vines out of trees. You may want to try to dress it up aesthetically, but you could harm yourself or you could harm the tree by pulling bark off of the tree. Leave the cut vines in the trees and they will decompose on their own. Nature will take care of it. Foliar spray method. You'll need either a handheld tank sprayer or a backpack sprayer. If you're dealing with a really, really large infestation, you might be looking at an ATV with a large tank. But for most of our purposes, handheld tank, you can pick those up for about $12 to $15 at Lowe's, or a backpack sprayer. And these are the 3 different herbicides that are in the chart. Again, these are generic and they are non-registered, so the public can buy them. You're going to need to use a surfactant to help the herbicide stick, and marker dye to see where you've sprayed. And what we mean by surfactant is if you don't add a surfactant, the herbicide is water-based and it's going to roll right off the leaves just like raindrops. So adding a teeny bit, we're talking a teaspoon per gallon of a natural surfactant. The one we like is made with limonene, and all it does is it makes it create a sticky surface, almost like soapy. And that will help it stick to the leaves long enough to be absorbed. And you're aiming to spray about 90% of the leaves. You don't want it dripping off, so you want to wet the leaves without seeing herbicide runoff. That'll be wasted and it'll get on non-target plants. So again, we have multiple webinars going into a lot more detail, but those would be the 2 herbicide methods if needed with these specific 6 species. So please help us put out these fires and we can all become better stewards of this land we love. So, questions?
Yes, there's a few that came in. One of them was, I reside on the east side of DC near National Park Service property. For years, I have been reporting invasives to NPS and identifying via iNaturalist, but NPS does no remediation. We are losing mature trees. I am part.
Natalie, I think you became
I got
muted.
disconnected.
Okay.
All right, let me go back to the Q&A. Okay. We are losing mature trees. I am part of PRISM. What other steps are available to address invasives on our natural lands?
So I'm sorry, was part of the question was about national parks?
Yeah, so she lives near the National Park Service. For years, I've been reporting invasives to NPS and identifying via iNaturalist, but NPS does no remediation.
Yeah.
What other steps are available to address invasives on our natural lands?
So uh, it's a timely question. We were just checking in with Jake Hughes from Shenandoah National Park about what is the current status of volunteers and remediation on national park land. Um, so national park land is federal land, and so it's not controlled by Virginia legislation. And all work that's done on national park land has to go through an approved planning process. So it's not spontaneous work. There are annual plans that are put together, they are approved. Uh, it controls very tightly herbicide use. Right at the moment, they're very strict about what types of volunteers uh, and volunteer programs can do it. Unfortunately, it's out of our hands, and our national parks are deeply under resourced when it comes to invasive plant management. Uh, I wish that there was more that prisons could do about this. You can reach out to your congressperson and ask them to provide a lot more funding for national parks and to help them speed up their process of putting these programs together. They know a lot of them are just fighting to keep rangers employed right now and dealing with infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And there's just very little resources for invasive plant management on federal land. We were looking to see, was there anything we can do now that we have a new law in Virginia here that allows volunteers to expand work on state land. We wanted to see what could we do to expand that into our federal parks. And at the moment, we just don't have the ability to do anything there. So we're as constrained. We have to work within their constraints. I wish I had a better answer for you.
All right, the next question. Um, the Virginia Invasive Plant ID and Control app says to treat wavy leaf in April, but the chart says May, June. Are any of the 3 months effective?
So it probably starts out with April because depending upon where you are, you might start to see some early appearance. Wavy leaf dies back and completely disappears in the wintertime. So depending on where you are and how warm it is, you might begin to see some emergence in April. Here, where we are in Central Virginia, it's really May is when it's starting to emerge. But you can hand pull wavy leaf as soon as you see it, and we encourage you to do so.
Okay, and what does aquatic glyphosate do to amphibians and macroinvertebrates if spraying along a stream?
That is a question for uh, Virginia Tech, who does the research and publishes the impact. And it's also, you can read the EPA registration information for how they test and label aquatic safe um, herbicides. So we rely on the labeling and the testing, and they have verified that it is safe. We don't ever recommend, even if you're not in an aquatic environment, we don't recommend using the non-aquatic version of glyphosate. Just get the aquatic version regardless of where you are. Other questions?
There's one question. Uh, Um, reporting sightings of these five alarm fire species, who do we report to?
So you can report either using iNaturalist, you can report using EdMaps, or you can go to the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services uh, for two-horned trappa, and there is a form on there. I believe we have a link to it on our website where you can report that, and they will get involved with sending out people because they're very closely tracking the spread of trappa from pond to pond. And if the infestation is large enough, there may be some assistance available to get in there and get it dealt with. But those are, you can also go, there are links for reporting on virginiainvasives.org, which is run by the Virginia, and then the DCR has a link as well. So there's several different ways that you can get to there, but you can also just put it on a naturalist and they're monitoring that in EdMaps, and they're going to pick up those reports.
Great. And I know it's a little past one, but the last question was, when these are pulled, what's the best way to discard it? Especially Japanese.
Especially which?
Japanese knotweed.
So Japanese knotweed, you do not pull. You're going to spray that and leave it in place to die, and it's going to die back, and you'll end up with dead canes. And once the canes are completely dead, they can be burned, but you're not going to move it off the property. Wavy leaf grass can be hand pulled, and as long as it's not flowering or seeding, you can actually, like Japanese stilt grass, you can just leave it to dry out and right where you find it, or you can let it dry out on a tarp. Again, this is all if it doesn't have seeds on it. And compost if you need to, but you can just allow it to desiccate and dry out and leave in place. Any other last minute questions? If not, I want to thank you all for joining us. Just a quick reminder, Blue Ridge Prism is a very tiny nonprofit. We rely on friends like you. If you enjoyed this webinar, it was helpful for you, we always encourage a donation if you're able to help us continue to bring content like this to our audience. We're really grateful that you joined us. We're very grateful for your help in assisting us being hyper vigilant about these 6 5-alarm fire species. We could add more to the list, but from what we're seeing out there, these are the ones that we're elevating to the top priority. If you have these on your property or you have them in your community, it's a 5-alarm fire. We need all hands on deck for these. I thought I saw one more hand come up. Is there one more hand, Natalie?
Is there a project on iNaturalist to report the invasives?
Sarah Tangren has a project. Sarah Tangren is my colleague at the National Capital Prison. She has a project called Invader Detectives, which you can join. She's specifically tracking some new arrivals, but in general, just by uploading the sighting to iNaturalist, that acts as a report for the agencies that are tracking what's getting reported on iNaturalist or EdMaps. You don't have to join a specific project to report. Okay, with that, thank you. We'll let you get back to your afternoon. We really appreciate you joining us, and until next time.